The mansion on the hill was not a home, it was a museum of quiet. Every morning, the sun would creep over the manicured lawns and pour through the giant windows of the east wing, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air of rooms no one ever entered. This was Maya's world, a beautiful, silent prison she now called her life. She would wake in her massive, cold bed, the sheets always perfectly smooth on the other side, a constant reminder of her solitude. Her husband, Kenji, was away again, this time in Tokyo for a merger. He was a billionaire, a man who built empires out of thin air, but he could not or would not build a single moment of warmth for the woman he had married. Maya wandered the vast hallways, her soft slippers making no sound on the marble floors. She had once dreamed of a marriage filled with laughter and shared secrets, of lazy Sunday mornings and hands held under a table. Instead, she had gotten a business arrangement. Kenji needed a wife to present at galas, a beautiful, serene face to complete the picture of his perfect life. In return, she had been promised security, a shield from her own troubled past. She had not realized the shield would be so cold, or that it would lock her in as much as it locked the world out. She was 24 years old, and she had never been kissed with true feeling, never been held through the night. She was, in every way that mattered to a heart that longed for connection, a virgin. Her only friend was Hannah, a bright and cheerful woman who worked as Kenji's personal assistant. Hannah visited twice a week, bringing gossip from the city and a temporary break from the silence. Today they sat in the sunroom, surrounded by thriving plants that seemed to get more attention than Maya did. "He didn't even call on your anniversary?" Hannah asked, her voice soft with disbelief. Maya shook her head, tracing the rim of her teacup. "He sent a necklace. It was delivered by a courier. The card just said, 'From Kenji.'" She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's very expensive." "Expensive doesn't mean anything if it has no heart," Hannah sighed. She reached out and squeezed Maya's hand. "It's not right, Maya. This loneliness. You deserve so much more." Later that afternoon, a rare thing happened. The house phone rang, the sharp sound cutting through the quiet. It was Kenji. His voice was crisp and efficient as always, like a business report. "Maya, a situation has come up in Singapore. I'll be extending my trip for another 3 weeks." Maya's heart sank, a familiar weight settling in her chest. "I understand," she whispered. "However," he continued, "there have been some security concerns. A disgruntled former associate. Nothing for you to worry about, but as a precaution, my brother Javier will be staying at the estate while I'm away. He will ensure your safety." The news sent a jolt of anxiety through her. Javier. She had never met him. Kenji spoke of his older brother sparingly, and always with a hint of, what was it? Not dislike but a kind of frustrated respect. All she knew was that Javier was not part of the corporate world. He had, according to Kenji's vague explanations, chosen a different path, one that involved traveling the world and doing what Kenji called unprofitable charity work. The thought of a stranger, another man, invading her lonely sanctuary filled her with dread. 2 days later, a sturdy, practical Jeep pulled up the long driveway, a stark contrast to the sleek, black cars Kenji preferred. Maya watched from her window, her stomach a tight knot of nerves. The man who stepped out was not what she expected. He was tall like Kenji, but where Kenji was all sharp angles and tailored suits, this man was built with a broader, more solid strength. He wore simple, dark jeans and a leather jacket. His hair was a little too long, and as he looked up at the mansion, his face was serious but not cold. He had kind eyes even from a distance. When she opened the grand front door, he offered a small, genuine smile. "You must be Maya," he said, his voice a warm, low rumble, so different from Kenji's clipped tones. "I'm Javier." "Hello," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's nice to meet you." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment she felt truly seen. "Kenji didn't mention how beautiful you are," he said, not in a slick, flirty way but as a simple, honest statement. He then gestured to the giant house behind her. "He also didn't mention how quiet it is out here. It must get lonely." That one sentence, that simple acknowledgement of her reality, almost brought tears to her eyes. No one had ever said it out loud before. She just nodded, unable to speak. The first few days were a careful dance. Javier was a quiet presence, respectful of her space. He didn't try to fill the silence with meaningless chatter. He would be gone for parts of the day, walking the perimeter of the property, checking security systems with a focused intensity. But in the evenings he would find her. He didn't retreat to the guest wing like a ghost. One night, he found her curled up on a giant sofa in the library trying to read. "Can I join you?" he asked. She nodded, and he sat in a large armchair opposite her, not too close. He didn't have a phone or a tablet. He just sat, comfortable in the quiet. "This is a big house for one person," he remarked, his gaze sweeping the room of untouched books. "It is," Maya agreed softly. "What do you do all day?" he asked, his curiosity seeming real. And so she told him. She spoke of her painting, a hobby Kenji thought was frivolous. She talked about the books she read, the gardens she walked. She found herself telling him things she hadn't even told Hannah, about her childhood, her dreams of being an artist, the way the silence of the house sometimes felt like it was pressing down on her. He listened, his full attention on her, his eyes never wavering from her face. In return, he told her stories of his life. He spoke of building schools in remote villages, of the dusty, vibrant chaos of markets in faraway countries, of the stars in the desert sky that were so bright they looked close enough to touch. He spoke of people, not prophets. His world was one of action and connection, a world of feeling, and as he spoke, Maya felt a tiny frozen part of her heart begin to thaw. One evening, a man arrived at the gate, demanding to see Kenji. He was loud and angry, his face red. Maya, who had been heading to the garden, froze in fear at the sound of his shouting. Before she could even call for security, Javier was there. He moved quickly, stepping between her and the front door. "Stay inside, Maya," he said, his voice calm but firm. She watched through the window as Javier approached the gate. He didn't shout back. He stood tall, his shoulders set, and spoke to the man in a low, steady voice. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the effect. The man's bluster faded, replaced by a look of frustration and then, surprisingly, respect. He nodded once, got in his car, and drove away. When Javier came back inside, the air around him seemed to crackle with protective energy. "He won't be back," he said simply. Maya looked at him, this man who was a stranger just a week ago, and felt a surge of something powerful and new. "Thank you," she breathed. He looked down at her, and the intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. "No one should make you feel afraid in your own home, Maya. No one." That night, as she lay in her bed, the house didn't feel silent. It felt like it was holding its breath. The quiet was no longer empty, it was filled with the lingering warmth of Javier's presence, the echo of his stories, and the unspoken, terrifying, wonderful possibility that something in her life was about to change forever. The Museum of Quiet was showing its first crack, and a sliver of light was finally breaking through. The days that followed the confrontation at the gate settled into a new, unspoken rhythm, a rhythm that was entirely different from the lonely ticking of the clock that had governed Maya's life before Javier's arrival. The mansion, once a monument to isolation, began to feel like a shared space. Javier was no longer just a guardian in the periphery. His presence became woven into the very fabric of her daily existence. He was a quiet force, a steady warmth that slowly, irrevocably began to melt the icy shell around Maya's heart. It began with small, simple things. Javier noticed that Maya always drank tea in the afternoon, a solitary ritual she performed at the small table in the sunroom. The next day, as the clock neared 3, she found him there already, waiting with 2 steaming cups. He had remembered how she took it, a little honey, no milk. They didn't speak much during that first shared tea, but the silence was no longer empty, it was a comfortable, living thing that sat with them, a quiet understanding passing between them as they watched the afternoon light paint long shadows across the lawn. The following day, he brought a book of poetry he'd found in the library, its pages old and fragrant, and read a short verse aloud, his voice giving music to words she had only ever heard in her own head. It was a gesture so thoughtful, so entirely unlike anything Kenji had ever done, that it left her feeling breathless and seen in a way she had never known was possible. Their walks in the garden became longer, stretching from a brisk 15-minute circuit to meandering journeys that could last an hour or more. Javier would point out things she had never noticed. The intricate architecture of a spider's web beaded with morning dew, the particular way a certain rose unfurled its petals, the busy, purposeful path of a line of ants. He taught her to see the life teeming within her gilded cage. One afternoon he found her in her studio, a bright, airy room Kenji had furnished for her but never once entered. She was standing before a blank canvas looking lost. "He thinks it's a silly hobby," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper, her paintbrush hovering uselessly. Javier came to stand beside her, not too close, but his presence filled the space. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the canvas. When she nodded, he took a deep breath and pointed not at the canvas but at the window. "Paint what you feel, not what you see. The loneliness of that big oak tree standing by itself. Or the hope in that little patch of sunflowers, always turning their faces to the light." His words were a key, unlocking a door inside her she had long thought sealed shut. She dipped her brush in a bold, sunny yellow and began to paint, and for the first time in months she felt a flicker of genuine joy. The change in her was palpable even to Hannah, who visited with wide, knowing eyes. "You're glowing," Hannah whispered to her in the kitchen one day while Javier was outside. "You look alive." Maya could only blush, unable to put into words the transformation happening within her. She was waking up, coming back to life after a long, cold sleep, and it was all because of the quiet, patient man who was slowly carving a place for himself in the fortress of her heart. The shift from comfortable companionship to something deeper, something more dangerous and electric, happened on a night of torrential rain. A violent summer storm lashed against the windows, the wind howling like a lonely animal. The power flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the mansion into a deep, velvety darkness punctuated only by flashes of lightning. Maya, who had never liked storms, felt a childish fear grip her. She was standing in the grand living room, shivering, when a beam of flashlight appeared. "Maya?" Javier's voice was a calm anchor in the chaotic dark. "I'm here," she said, her own voice trembling slightly. He found her, his flashlight illuminating her face. "It's just a storm. The backup generator will kick in soon." He had already lit a few large candles, their warm, dancing light pushing back the oppressive blackness, creating a small, intimate world within the vast room. He built a fire in the massive fireplace, and soon the crackling logs added their own light and warmth. They sat on the thick rug before the hearth, the storm raging impotently outside their circle of light and safety. He told her more stories then, his voice a low, soothing rumble against the percussion of the rain. He spoke of getting lost in a jungle for 3 days, of the kindness of strangers in a language he didn't speak, of staring into a volcano and feeling the awesome, terrifying power of the earth. He spoke of his belief that a life was measured not in wealth, but in experiences and the people you shared them with. Maya listened, mesmerized, her fear forgotten. She was drawn to him, to the life in his eyes, to the strength and compassion in his stories. As the storm began to subside, fading to a gentle patter, a comfortable silence fell between them. They were sitting close, the warmth of the fire and his nearness intoxicating. Javier looked at her, and in the flickering candlelight, his gaze was intense, full of unspoken words. "Maya," he began, his voice thick with an emotion that made her heart hammer against her ribs. "These past weeks, being here with you, I came here to protect you, but I find myself—" He didn't finish. Instead, he slowly, so slowly, raised a hand and gently cupped her cheek. His touch was warm and slightly rough, a working man's hand, and it sent a jolt of pure lightning through her entire body. She didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a brief second. "I know it's wrong," he whispered, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. "I know you are my brother's wife. But I can't help what I feel. I've fallen in love with you, Maya. I think I started falling the moment I saw you standing in that doorway, looking so beautiful and so sad." Tears welled in Maya's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of a dam finally breaking. All the loneliness, the longing, the repressed desire for connection surged to the surface. "Javier," she breathed, her voice cracking. I feel it too. I've never felt like this before. I've never been seen." That was all the confirmation he needed. He leaned in and his lips met hers. It was not a rushed or greedy kiss. It was slow, tender, and incredibly profound. It was a question and an answer, a promise and a confession all at once. It was her first real kiss, and it tasted of truth and of a future she had never dared to dream of. The world outside their circle of firelight ceased to exist. There was only his mouth on hers, his hands in her hair, the solid strength of his body against hers. That first, gentle kiss soon deepened, fueled by weeks of pent-up longing and unspoken desire. The careful restraint they had both maintained shattered like glass. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her tightly against him, and she went willingly, her own hands sliding up his strong back, learning the feel of him. The kisses grew hotter, more urgent, speaking of a hunger that went far beyond words. Whispers of each other's names mixed with soft gasps, the sounds swallowed by the cozy intimacy of their firelit world. His hands, so strong yet so gentle, began to explore, tracing the curve of her spine, learning the shape of her through the thin fabric of her dress. Every touch was a revelation, a new, delicious sensation she had only read about in books. She was nervous, a flutter of virgin anxiety in her stomach, but it was overpowered by a powerful, overwhelming need to be closer, to finally know what it was to be loved, to be wanted, to be truly alive. He was patient, his every move a silent question, waiting for her guiding touch, her soft sigh of permission before moving forward. That night, in the safety of his arms, surrounded by the dying storm and the glow of embers, Maya's world of quiet loneliness ended, and a new, vibrant, and beautifully complicated world began. The world outside their firelit sanctuary had not changed, but within the walls of the mansion and more importantly within the hearts of Maya and Javier, everything was irrevocably, beautifully different. The days that followed their stormy confession were a secret, sun-drenched paradise. The mansion, once a symbol of her isolation, became the backdrop for a hidden, precious love. They were careful, of course. The staff was discreet, and Hannah, now their sole and fiercely loyal confidant, acted as a lookout. But in the spaces between, they lived in a world of their own making. Mornings were shared over coffee, their hands brushing, their smiles speaking volumes. Afternoons were spent in her art studio, where Maya now painted with a furious, joyful passion, her canvases exploding with color and light, a direct reflection of the happiness blooming in her soul. Javier would sit and watch her, his quiet presence a constant source of strength, his admiration for her talent shining in his eyes. Evenings were for whispered conversations on the sofa, for slow dancing in the quiet living room, for the profound and thrilling intimacy that continued to unfold between them. For the first time, Maya understood what it meant to be truly known, body and soul, and the feeling was more powerful than any loneliness she had ever endured. This newfound paradise, however, was built on a foundation of sand, and the tide was inevitably coming in. A week earlier than expected, a terse email arrived from Kenji. His business in Singapore was concluded. He was returning home. The message was like a bucket of ice water, shocking them back into a reality they had almost forgotten. The easy laughter died, replaced by a tense, heavy silence. The day of his return loomed over them, a dark cloud threatening their fragile happiness. When Kenji's sleek, black car finally crunched up the gravel driveway, Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She stood beside Javier in the grand foyer, her heart pounding a frantic, fearful rhythm against her ribs. Kenji stepped inside, his posture as rigid and impeccable as ever. His sharp eyes scanned the room, missing nothing, and they immediately narrowed as they landed on his brother, standing so close to his wife. He saw the change in Maya instantly. The glow in her cheeks, the new confidence in her posture, the light in her eyes that he had never been able to kindle. It was a light that infuriated him. "Javier," Kenji said, his voice cold and flat. "I see the security has been adequate." "It has," Javier replied, his own voice steady and calm, but Maya could feel the tension radiating from him. The first dinner was a torturous affair. The long dining table, which had felt so cozy with just the two of them, was now a vast, icy chasm. Kenji spoke of profit margins and acquisitions. Javier remained silent, his gaze occasionally flicking to Maya, sending her a silent message of strength. Later that night, as Maya tried to sleep in her lonely bed once more, she heard the raised voices from Kenji's study. She crept to the door, her body trembling. "What is going on, Javier?" Kenji's voice was a low, dangerous snarl. "I'm not a fool. I see the way she looks at you. I see the way you look at her. You have disrespected me in my own home." There was a pause, and then Javier's voice, clear and unflinching. "I have not disrespected you, Kenji. But I will not lie to you. I love her. And she loves me." The silence that followed was more terrifying than the shouting. When Kenji finally spoke, his voice was dripping with venom. "You love her? She is my wife. A business arrangement, yes, but she belongs to me. You have betrayed me." "She was never yours to keep, Kenji," Javier countered, his voice rising with a passion his brother could never understand. "You locked a beautiful, vibrant woman in a golden cage and then threw away the key. You left her here to wither away in loneliness. You gave her everything money could buy and nothing that actually matters. I found her drowning and I offered her my hand. That is not a betrayal. Your neglect of her heart was the betrayal." Maya, listening at the door, felt tears stream down her face. Javier was fighting for her, for them, with a courage she desperately needed to find within herself. The confrontation did not end there. The next day, Kenji, coldly furious, confronted Maya directly. "I will not have my name tarnished by this indiscretion," he stated, his eyes like chips of ice. "You will end this and you will never see my brother again." This was the moment. The moment Maya had to choose between the safe, lonely life she knew and the uncertain, passionate future Javier offered. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and for the first time she looked her husband directly in the eyes without fear. "No, Kenji," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I will not. What you and I have is not a marriage. It is a contract, and I am terminating it. I would rather be poor and loved by Javier than rich and lonely with you. Her words hung in the air, a declaration of independence. Kenji was stunned into silence. He looked from her determined face to Javier's proud, supportive stance behind her. He saw the unshakable bond between them, a bond built on something his billions could never purchase. And in that moment, something in his cold, calculated heart finally cracked. He had spent his life acquiring things, but he had never once fought for a person. He saw the raw, real love between his brother and his wife, and he knew with a sickening certainty that he could not win. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a hollow, weary resignation. "Get out," he said quietly, not looking at either of them. "Both of you. Take your things and go. I will have my lawyers draw up the divorce papers. It will be clean. I won't fight it." It was not an act of kindness but one of exhausted pride. He could not bear the sight of their happiness in his home. They left the mansion that very day with only the clothes on their backs and a few small bags. They didn't look back. Javier used his savings to rent a small, sunny apartment on the other side of the city. It was a fraction of the size of the mansion, but to them it was a palace. It was filled with light, with laughter, with the smell of shared meals, and with a love that needed no vast, empty rooms to contain it. 1 year later, the final threads of the past were neatly tied. The divorce was finalized and Kenji, true to his word, had not contested it. He had thrown himself even deeper into his work, a king in an empire of his own making, but an empire that now felt emptier than ever. On a bright, sunny afternoon, Maya and Javier stood in a small, flower-filled garden, surrounded by a handful of their truest friends. Hannah stood as Maya's maid of honor, beaming with joy. Even Kenji was there, standing at a respectful distance, a silent, complicated figure who had, in his own way, given them their freedom. As Javier slid a simple golden band onto Maya's finger, his voice was thick with emotion as he vowed to love and cherish her for all the days of his life. Maya, her eyes shining with happy tears, her body gently rounded with their first child, made the same promise to him. They were no longer living in the shadow of a billionaire or hiding a forbidden love. They were simply Javier and Maya, building their own forever, one built not on gold, but on the unshakable foundation of truth, courage, and a love that had been brave enough to risk everything. Did Maya and Javier's journey to find true love against all odds capture your heart? If you were moved by their story of breaking free from a gilded cage to build a life of authentic happiness, then you won't want to miss our next romantic tale. Subscribe to our channel to be the first to experience the next story of passion, heartbreak, and triumphant love. A new, unforgettable journey into the heart is just around the corner.